Good day and welcome back to the channel. This video is specifically a repair video about one particular problem with the Nakajima WPT-150 electronic typewriter, and that has to do with irregular printing near the bottom of the characters. So let's look into what causes this and how we're going to fix it. Stay tuned. This procedure also applies to the WPT-160. However, all of the AE series Nakajima typewriters, this procedure does not apply to because they use an entirely different carrier mechanism. Now let's identify the actual problem. So as you can see here, I have an intermittent bottom of the characters have dropouts in them. It doesn't happen all the time. It seems to happen more frequently with the Toronto 10 typeface of the 3 print wheels that I have. And I believe the reason why is because the Toronto 10 of those 3 has the widest line weight, which means that the imprint pressure per unit area is the lowest. It doesn't hit as hard per unit area. And also, it will vary depending on the kind of paper you're using. And so I've isolated the problem through model-based problem solving to the idea that the centers of the imprint of the characters are not being impacted directly onto the equator, if you want to call it that, the forwardmost part of the platen. Instead, I believe the imprint is happening slightly below the equator of the platen, so that the bottoms of the characters are barely getting adequate pressure to imprint the characters onto the paper. So in order to know that you fixed the problem, you have to be able to first reproduce the problem. So I did a series of typings using the Toronto 10 typeface on various qualities of paper, and I found that the toothier and more fibrous the surface of the paper is, the more often I was going to see the problem, because the film, the carbon film, doesn't stick as well to those fibrous kinds of papers. So I've isolated the problem, I believe, to the alignment of the printing mechanism relative to the platen. Now we have to go in and see how we can adjust it. So next, I will direct your attention to the nadist.com website, nadist.com. This is Nakajima's North American distribution website, and under the Parts and Manuals link, you will see all 6 models that they currently sell, and you want to click on the download parts list for the WPT-150 or 160, depending on which machine you have. Now we're going to arrow down to page 14 in the document, which is actually page 11 of the document itself, but it's 14 of 28 in the PDF. And you will see the exploded view of the carrier mechanism, and I want to draw your attention to part ID number 23. There's 2 of them, one on each side of the carrier mechanism. And if you look down at the parts list on the next page, part 23 is called adjustment plate. So the adjustment plate has a screw, and if you look at the left-hand part 23 in that illustration, it has a cylindrical extension coming out of it. That cylindrical extension goes into the mechanism and holds the actual frame that supports the spin motor and the print wheel mechanism. So I believe what we can do is loosen screw 15 and adjust 23. I think the adjustment plate part 23 needs to be raised up slightly. That will raise that center mechanism of the printing mechanism higher to match the equator or the midpoint of the platen itself. So let's look and see where those parts are on the machine itself. Okay, so I have the typewriter turned off and unplugged, and I have removed the ribbon cartridge itself. We're looking at the right side of the print mechanism, and by the way, the print mechanism is back at the left margin. So I want to point out to you a couple parts here. This screw here we're going to have to loosen. That's a Phillips screw. Actually, it's probably a JIS, but Phillips is close enough. And then this bracket itself, this adjustment plate, what we're really interested in is the slot, this rectangular slot just above the screw. We're going to want to put a flat blade screwdriver. This is about a 2.5 millimeter tip wide screwdriver. We're going to want to put that flat blade screwdriver in the slot of the adjustment plate, and then we're going to, once we loosen the Phillips screw, we're going to lift up on this a little bit to raise the adjustment plate slightly. So I'm using a very small screwdriver handle with a Phillips bit in it. I'm going to have to get both hands in here. I won't be able to show you on camera because there's no room, but because this is a Phillips or probably a JIS screw, as you know, in order to get these screwdriver bits to stay in the head of the screw, you have to push on it. Otherwise, it'll cam out. So you're going to be putting a little bit of pushing pressure on the carrier mechanism itself. So it's a good idea to wedge something gently in the between the left side of the carrier and the frame of the machine to keep you from moving the carrier mechanism, putting stress on the belt. So before we do these adjustments, we want to take a photo with your phone of that screw and that adjustment plate before and after. So here is the photograph before on the right side. Here's the photograph before on the left side. Notice the position of the screw head in reference to the gap around the screw head. You'll notice in the before pictures there is a little bit of a gap below the screw heads, between the bottom of the screw head and that bracket. And then the after pictures on mine, I have a little bit of a gap above the screw head, indicating how far I've raised it, and you should have about an equal gap on both sides. It doesn't have to be perfect, because when I did this adjustment initially, I only adjusted the right side, and as it turns out, it printed fine. I went ahead and adjusted the left side to be close to the right side, but it printed fine both ways. So we're just raising up the print mechanism just a millimeter, maybe less than 2 millimeters, just enough to center the printing better on the equator of the platen itself, right in the middle. So we're going to, again, loosen that screw while we have this flat blade screwdriver, and when the screw doesn't take much effort to loosen it, we're going to lift up on the adjustment plate and lift it about a millimeter or 2 millimeters, and then immediately tighten down the screw again. Okay, after you've done the adjustment on the right side, you want to go ahead and plug the typewriter back in, turn it on, let the carrier mechanism home itself, and then drive the carrier all the way to the right side, use the margin release, go to the far right. Now you're going to want to turn the typewriter off again, and you're going to want to gently wedge something in here to keep the print mechanism from moving as you put a little force on that Phillips screw. Same adjustment here on the left side of the carrier mechanism. Again, we're going to be putting this flat blade screwdriver, 2.5, 3 millimeter wide tip, in the slot, doing a little force to raise it up as we loosen the screw with our Phillips and move it up again about the same amount that we did on the other one, and then tighten the Phillips screw down again. So now that we've adjusted the adjustment plates on both the left and right side of the carrier mechanism so that the carrier is higher up, now we need to test the machine thoroughly to make sure that it's actually printing properly. So I would advise you to use a print wheel that has the widest or thickest line weight. In my case, that would be Toronto 10, and use some of your more toothy fibrous papers, because that will be like worst case scenario as far as print quality. So you want to type a whole bunch of stuff, type a whole page worth, and especially make sure you're using uppercase, lowercase, and all the characters, symbols, and all the tall symbols, your parentheses and your forward slash, and all your Q and the Y and the J and the P lowercase letters that have descenders. Make sure you check all those thoroughly, and then when you finish typing a test page, take the page out of the machine and examine it closely with a magnifying glass and make sure that you're not seeing any more dropouts in the bottoms of the characters. And I should also mention that you should be doing this test using Nakajima brand ribbons. Do not use off-brand ribbons because the film is not very good quality. It's not as thick. So here is a typing test using the Bookface Academic 10, and I am doing this at 12 pitch, and all the characters look fine, especially on the bottoms of the descenders like the JPQYs. I was repeatedly typing them on this line here, so looks very good on that. Here are more test typings using the Toronto 10 typeface. All of these QYJPs, they have descenders. All of the descenders look great. All the characters, especially these vertical slash characters, and all of them look really good. Here I switch over to the Bookface Academic. That looks good. And then this is also the erasing test. I type the word test, erase the E, and then type the word test in caps and erase the entire word, and it looks fine. And the impression on the erasing tape looks centered as well. So no evidence of any more problems of printing and having dropouts on the bottoms of the characters or on the top. They all look nice. Now, another check you should do also is to examine the characters that are lifted off of the ribbon itself and make sure those characters are nicely centered in the middle of the ribbon. You don't want the tops or bottoms of the characters to come anywhere close to the top or bottom edge of the ribbon, because that means you could start to have misprinting. In my case, after I did the adjustment on this machine, the characters peeled off of the ribbon were nicely centered in the middle of the ribbon, which is exactly what I wanted to see. And then another test you need to make is to make sure that it is properly doing the lift-off correction. So type some letters and words and do the lift-off correction again, making sure that the imprint or the impression of the lift-off on the lift-off film itself, the tape, is well centered in the middle of the tape. Once you have this adjustment done and you've verified it with the proper typing technique on your widest line weight of print wheel, then go ahead and test the machine using all of your other print wheels. Type all the characters, upper, lowercase, and the alternate characters. Make sure all of the characters are printing well. And if so, congratulations, you have improved the alignment of your WPT-150 or 160. It should be printing much better now. Thank you, and have a good day.